Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel to the bustling, incense-scented streets of Constantinople in the glory days of the Byzantine Empire. But we're not following a general, a saint, or an emperor. No, you'll be spending your day inside the modest sandals of a mid-level bureaucrat. Think ancient spreadsheets, papyrus paperwork, and the soft rustle of robes in a very drafty office. You'll wake up in a cramped, timber-framed apartment over a bakery that always smells slightly burned. You'll shuffle around on dusty mosaics, half asleep, trying to find your sash in the dim dawn light. You'll write dull decrees, field half-baked bribes, and dodge your supervisor's glares with the skill of a seasoned scribe. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive this. Not because it's deadly, but because it's so achingly boring. Your most dangerous foe today is a paper cut from imperial edicts and the ever-present threat of developing a scroll-related back spasm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing our little sleepy empire grow. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in darkness. Not full, oppressive darkness, but that smoky, uncertain kind that seeps in before dawn. The window shutters rattle gently. Outside, someone's rooster has confused the moon for the sun again. You lie on a narrow bed filled with straw and covered by a woven blanket that smells faintly of garlic and old beeswax. The blanket's warm. The room is not. You groan softly. Your neck aches, again, and your fingers are already stiff. It's going to be a long day. From the ceiling beam, a single oil lamp swings gently. You sit up and feel your heel brush against a rolled-up scroll. Always a scroll somewhere it shouldn't be. You're a mid-grade official in the Bureau of Official Petitions. Not prestigious, not lowly. Somewhere comfortably invisible. Just the way you like it. Below, on the street, a donkey brays. You hear the clack of early feet on stone, the baker, probably, cursing the coals. The scent of smoke begins to seep upward. Someone's starting a fire. Hopefully not under your floor again. You stretch, slowly. Your knees pop. You swing your legs over the side and nearly step on your own writing kit. Ink pot, dry quills, and a small knife for scraping parchment. You remind yourself to sharpen the knife. And replace the quill. And maybe your job. But first, clothes. You grope around the small shelf by your bed for your undertunic. A simple linen thing, surprisingly scratchy for how much it costs. Over it goes the main tunic, dyed that grayish cream that says, Civil Service Mid-Tier. Then, the leggings, awkward to pull on while seated. Then, the sash. It's red officially. But after years of wear, it's more bruised pomegranate, now. You tie it loosely, it's mostly symbolic, anyway, and mutter a half-hearted prayer to Saint Minos, patron of all who suffer silently at work. Your sandals are dry, which is the best thing you'll be able to say about your morning. Last week you stepped in something outside the fishmonger's and your left foot still smells like brine. You poke your head out the shutters. The Hagia Sophia looms in the distance, silhouetted against a lightning sky. It never looks small, no matter how many times you see it. But the grandeur of Constantinople feels very far away when you're standing barefoot with morning breath and lint in your ear. Time to get moving. You shuffle to the wash basin, a cracked thing with one leg shorter than the others, and splash your face. The water's cold enough to make you yelp. Downstairs, someone laughs. Your landlord's daughter. Again. You rub your eyes and peer into the tiny bronze mirror nailed to the wall. You look tired. You always look tired. Your beard is doing something ambitious on the left side, and your hair seems to have given up entirely. Perfect. Now, the real challenge, avoiding your neighbor. He's a retired cavalry officer who believes all civil servants are soft and prone to treason. He also likes to shout about grain prices at 5 a.m. You sneak past his door like a cat with a state pension. The stair creaks. You freeze. A cough. Nothing else. Success. You make it to the street just as the bells from a nearby monastery begin their lazy clanging. Not the great toll of the Hagia Sophia, just a small, intimate reminder that yes, another day has begun, and yes, you're already behind. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The wind off the Bosporus is bracing. You think briefly about quitting and opening a lentil cart. Then you remember your handwriting and the one time you tried to boil lentils and forgot the water. As you begin your walk, you pass other early risers. A boy with a basket of figs, a priest humming something tuneless, a cat with one ear and an expression of judgment. You nod at each, as if this were all very normal. Because it is. Bureaucrats walk early. You step over a cracked tile, the same one you trip on at least once a week. You don't trip today. Victory. By the time you reach the street corner, the sun is peeking over the rooftops, painting everything in pale gold. You pause for a moment, breath steaming, to admire it. You almost forget where you're going. Almost. Then a rat skitters across your sandal and the spell breaks. You sigh, adjust your sash, and begin the real trek toward the bureau. You have petitions to ignore. You shuffle toward your wardrobe, more generously described than it deserves, and pull open the carved cedar doors that groan like a senator's knees. Inside hang your limited options, tunics, cloaks, and sashes in varying degrees of wrinkle and disappointment. You run your fingers over each one as if choosing between personalities. This one says, "Trust me with your land dispute," while that one mumbles, "I definitely spilled ink on myself yesterday." You opt for the standard cream tunic again. It's safer. You once wore a deep blue one and were asked, twice, if you'd been promoted. You hadn't. That sort of mistake leads to awkward whispers at the water fountain. Or, in your case, the community cistern. The tunic is stiff from being dried near too much smoke. It smells faintly of oregano, ink, and civic resignation. The belt is a soft braided rope, worn but familiar. You loop it around your waist with a practiced flick, feeling momentarily like a gladiator of mediocrity. One final touch remains, the red sash. It's not just fabric. The sash is status, allegiance, burden. Every civil servant in your rank wears one, dyed with kermes beetles harvested in the eastern provinces. Or at least, that's the rumor. Yours probably passed through 6 middlemen and a vat of cabbage water before arriving on your shelf. But you drape it over your shoulder just the same, pulling it into place with the precise diagonal that says, "Yes, I have copied tax forms in triplicate and survived." The mirror confirms it. You look mildly respectable. Disheveled, yes, but like someone disheveled for the empire. Now come the boots. You eye the sandals from last summer, still dust-stained and slightly curled at the toes like old pita bread. But no, today you'll need the soft leather boots, the ones with the fraying laces and the squeaky right heel. The boots that say, "I have walked these halls, dodged the eunuch accountant, and lived to complain about it." As you bend to tie them, your knee cracks audibly. You freeze, listening for divine rebuke. None comes. You rise slowly, steadying yourself against the table. Another day older, another scroll deeper in this life. You gather your tools, an ink pot sealed with wax, a bundle of reeds cut to precise nib length, a small pouch of salt for the mid-morning egg, if fortune smiles, and your seal. The seal is round and unremarkable, engraved with a lion that looks more like a squinting dog. But it's yours, and in Byzantium, possession is 9/10 of the legal argument. Tucking these into your satchel, you reach for your outer cloak. Thick wool, too warm for midday but just right for the biting wind that sneaks through Constantinople's alleys before sunrise. You pause, cloak half on, and glance at your shrine. It's tucked into a corner, a painted tile of St. Basil, his eyes slightly mismatched but comforting in their stern watchfulness. You mumble a short prayer, half to him, half to the empire, and perhaps a little to your supervisor, who seems to wield more power than either. Then, with everything in place, you do the final check. Sash? Check. Seal? Check. Boots? Regretfully, check. And then, like a soldier reporting for duty, you step into the corridor. The stairwell is quiet, the wood creaking beneath your steps like a conspirator whispering secrets. Your neighbor's door is shut. but from inside you hear the rhythmic snore of someone who hasn't worried about a tax form in years. Lucky man? As you descend, your hand glides over the banister, polished not by wax but by centuries of anxious palms. At the bottom, the entryway's curtain billows slightly. Someone's opened the front before you. You inhale, smoke, olives, faint horse droppings. Constantinople in winter. You push the curtain aside and step into the morning. Your cloak flaps in the breeze, caught in the city's odd mixture of sea air and chimney smoke. A dog barks somewhere uphill. Church bells ring distantly, closer to the palace quarter. Here in the residential district, life stirs slowly. Windows creak open, shutters bang, and old women sweep the dust off marble steps like it'll stay away this time. You head east, toward the rising sun and the Forum of Constantine, where your bureau squats among mosaicked arches and ivy-covered columns. The walk is not long, but it requires attention. The streets twist like political allegiances, and the flagstones are slick with yesterday's rain, or possibly soup. No one ever knows for sure. Your boots squeak as promised. A boy runs past you, trailing a chicken on a string. A vendor yawns and rearranges his pyramid of leeks for the third time. You nod at the priest standing under a faded fresco, and he nods back with the practiced suspicion of a man who's seen too many tax collectors in one lifetime. A few more steps, and you cross into the artisan quarter. Here the smells shift: leather, dye, a faint metallic tang from the goldbeater's shop. A group of apprentices carries a vat of something you decide not to question. One of them sneezes. You bless him automatically. The breeze sharpens as you approach the bureau. A stork balances atop a nearby statue of the Empress Theodora, preening itself with serene disdain. You always liked that statue, her gaze seems to say. I ran this empire in heels, you can manage a few reports. Finally, you turn the corner and behold it, the Bureau of Official Petitions. It's not majestic. The stone is weathered, the columns a little chipped. The doorway sags like it's just about done with everything. But it stands, reliable and gray, just like you. You pull the cloak tighter, straighten your sash, and prepare to enter the mouth of the Empire's most tedious beast. Time to get to work. The wooden doors creak open like a reluctant admission. Inside, the air is thick with parchment dust, lamp oil, and the unmistakable scent of bureaucracy. A junior scribe scuttles past you with a tower of scrolls nearly as tall as he is. You step aside just in time to avoid being whacked by the tail end of a papyrus labeled "Request for sand reallocation, urgent." Your boots announce your arrival with their usual squeak, which, by now, is essentially your signature. A few heads glance up and then down again, attention snapped back to the ink-stained pages before them. You walk the familiar stretch of hallway, stone walls lined with hooks for cloaks, niches for saints, and the occasional cat. The cats, of course, are neither staff nor guest. They simply are. Just like the Empire. You reach your desk, positioned squarely beneath a window that lets in light when it pleases and wind always. You settle into your chair with a sigh that somehow echoes. The wood welcomes you with the gentle creak of companionship. The desk bears the scars of your service, ink splotches, a scorch mark from an ill-advised candle, and one corner suspiciously chewed by mice or a very ambitious scribe. You begin the day's ritual. First, unseal the ink pot, just enough of a struggle to feel accomplished. Then, unwrap the reed pens. You choose one with a sharp nib, perfect for passive-aggressive footnotes. Your scrolls await, neatly stacked in an order only you understand. The first is a petition to reroute a public sewer. Again. You sigh, dip your pen, and begin the slow, looping script required for official documents. Each letter must obey the calligraphy of the bureaucracy. No flourishes, no flair, just long, obedient curves and loops. You write, to the Honorable Office of Drainage and Sanitation, from the petitioner Flavius Callinicus of the third quarter. The office murmurs with quiet activity. Quills scratch. Clerks mutter. Somewhere, someone coughs rhythmically, as if trying to form a sentence but giving up halfway. A potboy walks past carrying hot water for tea, slopping only slightly on the mosaic floor. You catch a hint of cinnamon and cloves. Not for you, of course. That kind of spiced tea is reserved for those 3 desks closer to the supervisor's chamber. As you continue transcribing, a pigeon lands on the windowsill and watches you with unnerving judgment. It tilts its head, ruffles its feathers, and deposits a small gift you immediately regret witnessing. Historians still argue whether pigeons were sacred omens or just feathered vandals. You mutter aloud, which earns you a tired glance from Maximos, the clerk to your left. He's already halfway through his second scroll and has the kind of expression that suggests he'd rather be hunting Visigoths than copying land deeds. Time trickles on. The first scroll leads to a second, a report of stolen roofing tiles, followed by a marriage dispute involving 3 goats, a half-finished dowry, and a brother-in-law who may or may not be imaginary. That last one's phrasing is poetic. Let it be known that upon the morning of Saturn's day, the said livestock did vanish, and the bride's honor is now ambiguous. You pause. Consider your options. Then simply add a note, referred to local tribunal. Offer no further imperial comment. A bell rings faintly in the hall, the first signal of midday. You stand, stretch your aching back, and glance toward the supervisor's door. Still closed. You're safe. For now. You move to the records shelf to return a scroll, brushing past a bust of Emperor Theophilos that no one quite remembers ordering. Its nose is chipped. Its gaze is stern. You've once balanced your lunch on it, but only once. As you shelve the scroll, your eye catches an older document. Its seal is cracked. The title reads, Inventory of Military Camels, Antioch Region, 829 C. Temptation rises. You flip it open. It is, in fact, exactly what it says. Line after line of camels described with oddly specific notes. Prone to flatulence, enjoys figs, dislikes iconography. You chuckle. One day you think someone will find your scrolls, and their amusement will be quiet and sleepy too. Maybe they'll wonder what kind of person filed 43 separate reports about bridge mildew. You return to your desk just as Stephanos arrives, a senior clerk whose beard seems to house its own climate. He offers you a fig pastry, slightly squashed but fragrant. This is rare. He must be in an unusually generous mood or feeling guilty for last week's stolen lunch. You accept the pastry, mutter thanks, and devour it slowly, savoring the burst of sweetness against the dry ink smell of your morning. A crumb falls into a papyrus crease. It joins a long lineage. Stephanos sits down with a grunt. You seen the census forms for the outer provinces? He asks. You nod vaguely. You haven't, but you've developed a skill for nodding in ways that suggest intimate familiarity with obscure documents. He seems satisfied and begins scrawling something involving olive subsidies. Over by the heating brazier, a young assistant accidentally knocks over a cup of water. Everyone freezes for a moment as the liquid seeps toward the shelves. A junior clerk yelps, grabs the cup, and proceeds to blot the puddle with a piece of wool. His own scarf, actually. It smells like sheep and desperation. Crisis narrowly averted. You settle into a rhythm again. Right, blot, stamp, sigh. Occasionally you glance out the window, where the stork from earlier now stands on one leg, looking smug. By the time the second bell rings, marking the mid-meal break, you've completed 6 petitions, corrected a faulty boundary record, and started a side list titled Questions I'd Rather Not Ask About the Palace Plumbing. Your hand cramps, your eyes blur slightly, and your stomach growls. Time for lunch, if the gods of preserved olives and slightly stale bread smile upon you today. You ease away from your desk, shoulders stiff from the slow torture of bureaucratic posture. Your fingers, curled from hours of reed pen clenching, unfurl with faint cracking sounds. Somewhere in your joints, a Byzantine symphony of creaks and groans begins to play, a soft, aching fugue for one. The hallway to the mess area, if one dares call it that, is a narrow corridor made cheerier only by the presence of a dusty mural featuring Saint Euphemia single-handedly negotiating a grain tax. Her expression is serene, but you've always suspected a note of passive aggression in her gaze. You pass your fellow scribes and administrators, all in varying states of hopeful hunger and mild gastrointestinal regret. Someone always brings fermented turnips. Someone always regrets it. The lunchroom, or more accurately, the archway beside the copyist's annex, is filled with an informal jumble of benches, small tables, and one heroic stool that has survived at least 2 fires and 1 incident with a particularly heavy tax ledger. You claim your usual spot, halfway between the window and the pot of stale barley tea. From your bag, tucked under your robes like a state secret, you withdraw your provisions. Today's spread: a small wheel of goat cheese, slightly sweatier than ideal, half a flatbread, 2 dried apricots, and a single salted fish that looks at you with the dull, judging eyes of long death. A clerk across the way unwraps something suspiciously decadent, a fig and honey roll with almonds. He catches your look, and, with Byzantine smugness refined over years, slowly takes a bite. "My cousin's in imports," he says, which explains everything and nothing. You chew thoughtfully, gazing at the play of sunlight on the mosaic floor. It glimmers on tiny chips of blue and gold tile, a silent reminder that the empire may be in slow decline, but it still knows how to shimmer. A pair of younger clerks nearby are arguing over imperial abbreviations. One insists, "PTO means please transcribe officially," while the other is convinced it stands for Post Theodora Order. Both are wrong. You know it simply means please turn over, the back side of a scroll being, tragically, as in demand as the front. You don't bother correcting them. It's more entertaining to watch their confident confusion unfold, like a very slow duel with no stakes. You sip the tea. It tastes like someone once waved a barley stalk near hot water and called it a day. Still, it's warm, and warmth in a Byzantine office is a precious currency. You close your eyes, just briefly, and let the hum of distant bells and muffled conversation lull your mind into a lunchtime haze. Historians still argue whether office breaks in Constantinople were scheduled by sun angle, bell chimes, or sheer collective fatigue. You think lazily, biting into the chewy end of your bread. You're betting on fatigue. You overhear someone boasting about their neighbor's cousin who saw the Empress pass by in a carriage with actual glass windows. The story changes slightly every time it's told. First it was glass, then crystal, and last week it was enchanted mica. Still, it fills the gap between bites, and that's what matters. You stretch your legs under the table, carefully avoiding the cracked tile that once swallowed someone's sandal. A scribe from accounts strolls by, balancing 3 scrolls and humming a hymn slightly off-key. You wonder if he knows he's using the wrong melody or if that's his quiet rebellion against imperial uniformity. Someone brings out a stringed lyre and starts plucking tunelessly. This is not music, strictly speaking, but more of an acoustic boundary-setting device. Within a few moments, most of the room clears out to return to their desks, if only to escape the plunking menace. You linger for a moment longer, letting the room empty a bit before heading back. On your way, you pass the statue of Basil the Bureaucratic, unofficial title, unofficial statue, but entirely real. A misfit bust tucked in a back hallway niche, it's become something of a local shrine. Tradition holds that if you rub the top of Basil's head, your scrolls will stay unspoiled for a week. So, naturally, you do. Your fingers graze the smooth marble dome, and for a moment, you feel vaguely blessed, or at least not cursed. Back at your desk, the pile of work appears to have reproduced. Mysteriously. Unnaturally. Like damp laundry or imperial tax laws. A new scroll awaits, marked with a green ribbon, which is never good. Green means complexity, or politics, or worse, ecclesiastical audits. You settle in again, fending off a mild post-lunch drowsiness and preparing to decipher this new mystery. The seal is elaborate. The handwriting, immediately, is a crime against syntax. But you press on. The matter? A request from a monastery near Trebizond, asking whether their imported incense shipments should be taxed as luxuries or listed under essential spiritual supplies. You blink slowly. Somewhere in the empire, monks are fighting a quiet war over cinnamon. You draft your reply with utmost care. It must appear thoughtful, neutral, and above all, difficult to challenge. You write, "The classification of olfactory elements for liturgical enhancement shall remain subject to local diocesan discretion. pending further review. That should delay everything for at least 2 months. The pigeon returns. This time with a friend. You don't acknowledge them. That's how they win. You make progress on a petition about relocating a public latrine due to ghost sightings, yes, again, and a complaint from a fisherman's guild about the unholy presence of a tax collector near their docks. The phrase reeked of damnation, and squid appears twice. As the hours stretch, your hand finds its rhythm again. Quill to parchment. Sand ink. Thought to form. A silent act of imperial continuity, performed not in marble or bronze, but in smudged characters on curling scrolls. There's something calming about it. Like organizing a drawer, or alphabetizing disaster. By the time the bell rings to mark the late shift, you've settled back into the quiet murmur of the office. The stork has flown off. The window lets in a breeze that smells of sea and soap and the faintest trace of something fried, some blessed tavern's contribution to the empire's well-being. You roll your shoulders. Another scroll. Another complaint. Another footnote that will never be read. And somehow, in all that tedium, a strange kind of peace. You stifle a yawn that threatens to unlock your jaw like a hinge, blink away the molasses-thick haze of post-lunch drowsiness, and slide the next scroll toward you like it's a precious relic. It's not. It's a dispute over dye tariffs from the docks near the Golden Horn, but in your world, this might as well be a minor epic. You uncork your inkwell, which gives off a faint tang of vinegar and old walnuts, and dip your pen. The ink has thickened since this morning. That's all right, so have you. Outside your office window, seagulls scream like tiny emperors arguing over a biscuit. You try to block them out as you decode the scroll's wild opening, unto the honorable and estimable clerk of fiscal piety. You've got at least 3 titles depending on the department writing to you. None of them are your real one. This time it's a merchant guild requesting retroactive tax exemption for a batch of indigo they thought was for ecclesiastical use. The wording is fantastically vague, an attempt to pass off commercial dye as a holy pigment. You imagine a priest daubing blue onto vestments while trying not to look complicit. You tap your pen to your lip. Historians still argue whether these kinds of accidental tax exemptions were creative faith or creative fraud. You lean toward the latter, but hey, who are you to judge? Your reply is carefully phrased, deferential yet unyielding, mildly poetic but studiously non-committal. You sign it with a practiced flick. Years ago, you crafted a signature so unintelligible that even you can't quite replicate it each time. This, ironically, is part of your job security. The office is growing quieter now, in that late afternoon lull when everyone's both too tired and too resigned to argue. A new junior scribe arrives with a bundle of notices from the East Quarter, one scroll falling loose and unrolling across the floor like a clumsy serpent. You pretend not to see it. If you acknowledge it, it becomes yours. You let the intern pick it up, though not without a gentle, knowing glance. He'll learn. We all do. Eventually. One parchment stands out, stamped in red wax and unusually thick. A census update from a distant Anatolian province, compiled by a clerk who clearly took their duties a bit too personally. The population is broken down not only by profession, but by goat ownership, shoe material, and whether their roofs are mostly intact or spiritually compromised. That's a new one. You admire the energy. You also curse it, because now you'll need to file a response clarifying imperial census categories. Again. As you scribble a correction guide, goats are livestock, not domestic partners. Even if given names, you're distracted by the faint sound of chanting. You glance up. It's coming from across the courtyard, where a small group of imperial librarians are rehearsing hymns for tomorrow's tax forgiveness ceremony. Yes, you heard that right. Byzantium has ceremonies for tax forgiveness. They are very rare, very solemn, and always, somehow, just a little out of reach for you. You pause to enjoy the echoing harmonies. There's something oddly lovely about monks singing about debt relief. Holy are the ledgers that balance. One line goes. You're almost moved. Almost. You return to your paperwork, this time a report about missing papyrus stalks, probably eaten by rats. The same rats, you suspect, who have evaded every trap for 3 years and seem increasingly smug about it. As you shuffle another document onto the awaiting further confusion pile, a colleague leans over and whispers, "Did you hear? The emperor sneezed during morning liturgy." You blink. "Twice," he adds, with a look that suggests impending dynastic crisis. It's a very Byzantine moment, where bodily functions can spark theological debates. Some say it's a bad omen, your colleague murmurs. Others say it was simply dusty. You nod gravely, as though you, too, have read the omens in imperial mucus. By now the candle on your desk has become your most reliable coworker, flickering steadily, offering no opinions, and only occasionally catching your documents on fire. You push a stack of scrolls back into the shelf with the delicate motion of a man avoiding an avalanche. A final memo arrives. This one's handwritten by someone whose calligraphy suggests they've either never seen an actual letter or were trained by a goose. It's an internal request to update the procedural guide on imperial robe color codes. Apparently, the deep plum shade for clerks is clashing with the morning lilac used by grieving nobles. A crisis of optics, if not theology. You sigh and add it to your growing problems I'll deal with when Constantinople falls list. Still, there's something meditative about it. The way the ink pools on parchment. The featherlight scratch of quill tip. The low murmur of your neighbor counting coins. The faint scent of olive oil and candle wax. It's a rhythm you've come to know, to appreciate. A quiet beat in the imperial machine. No glory, no warfare, no proclamations, just scroll after scroll, word after word, bureaucracy without end. And as the sun dips behind the Hagia Sophia's dome, and your candle stretches its last glow into the shadows, you realize you haven't moved your legs in hours. You stand slowly, joints popping like distant catapults, and stretch your back until it sounds like the fall of Troy. Your robe is rumpled. Your eyes sting. But you've survived the afternoon shift, which, in this office, might as well be a military triumph. You shuffle away from your desk like a parchment-stuffed tortoise, pausing only to shake your foot free of a wax seal that has somehow adhered itself to your sandal. The late afternoon air in the hallways is warm and smells faintly of ink, old bread, and something unidentifiably sour, probably from the corner where a half-eaten fig pastry has gone rogue behind a pillar. As you head toward the archives chamber, you pass under mosaics glittering in the mellow light slanting through stained glass windows. One of the tiles depicts an angel rolling its eyes, probably not intentional, but you're convinced it's the most accurate expression in the building. Your path winds past a pair of junior bureaucrats mid-whisper. They fall silent as you pass, which is the international sign of someone either talking about you or about something even duller than you. Possibly both. You push open the heavy door to the archive, which moans like a bored ghost. Inside, the temperature drops. You're met with rows upon rows of cedarwood shelves, stretching high into the shadows like the most boring forest imaginable, one filled not with birdsong but ledger notes and ink blots. The archivist greets you with a nod, then vanishes into the stacks without a word. He's the strong, silent type. Probably hasn't spoken since the reign of Theodosius. You locate today's treasure trove, a crate marked Miscellaneous Clerical Contradictions, 9th to 10th Century. Ah yes, the wild years. Inside, a baffling assortment of scrolls, vellum scraps, and one surprisingly aggressive-looking brass paperweight in the shape of a tiny ox. You sit at the central table, where a thin layer of dust mutes your sleeve like a bad omen. Your goal here is to cross-check updated tax quotas with records from the last census, compiled by a monk who believed numbers were sentient and occasionally offended by subtraction. His notes include multiple apologies to the digit 5. As your fingers trace columns of numerical data written in increasingly ornate Greek script, you marvel, not for the first time, that someone once decided this was the best use of your life. And yet, it's oddly satisfying. There's a strange peace in translating chaos into order, or at least into alphabetized confusion. One scroll catches your eye. It's titled Revenue Exceptions from Monasteries with Unusually Musical Livestock. You raise your eyebrows. That's a new one. Apparently, A flock of sheep near Cappadocia has gained minor fame for bi and g in harmony. The local monks insist this is a divine sign and that taxing them would be, quote, an affront to heavenly acoustics. You suppress a smile and jot a marginal note. Consult choral exemption clause. Yes, that's real. Historians still argue whether these exemptions were genuine spiritual respect or just extremely clever accounting. As you roll up the scroll, your elbow bumps a smaller stack and thwack, a wax tablet hits the floor. You bend down, joints groaning like a Byzantine church door, and squint at the etched text. It's a personal memo from one scribe to another, reminding them to never again send missives without double-checking seal orientation, or we'll end up blessing cabbage shipments instead of scrolls. You chuckle quietly. The imperial seal facing the wrong direction had once led to a scandalously sanctified shipment of fermented vegetables. The monks had eaten them anyway, and reportedly found spiritual enlightenment somewhere between pickled turnip and sauerkraut. You file the cabbage tablet in your mental "do not repeat" folder right next to "don't wear wool in July" and "never trust a bishop with a goat-shaped walking stick." By now your back is reminding you that this bench was designed before the concept of lumbar support. You rise, stretch again, and begin compiling your summary scroll, a master record combining updated quotas, exemptions, and any items involving unusually talented farm animals. As you write, you consider the sheer number of decisions that hinge on your pen. Whether a monastery gets to keep its olive harvest. Whether a local governor can legally import Armenian soapstone. Whether the imperial wine cellars should count broken amphorae as losses or spiritual evaporation. You wonder if your name will ever be remembered. If, 1,000 years from now, someone will stumble across your scrolls and say, "Ah yes, the great compiler of goat tax records." Probably not. More likely, they'll wonder why so much ink was wasted on whether barley tithes were better measured in jars or bushels. You pause and scribble one last line on the parchment. Filed with due diligence and moderate interest. It's become your unofficial motto. As you return the scrolls to their proper niches, careful not to disturb the dust that acts as the archive's only real filing system, you hear footsteps, soft, deliberate. The archivist is back, carrying a tray with 2 small clay cups of barley tea. You didn't ask for it. He doesn't speak. He just nods and sets it beside you. You sip the tea. It tastes like slightly warm pond water and duty. Perfect. By the time you exit the archive, the hallway is nearly empty. The final sunlight filters in like honey through linen, illuminating the tiny motes of dust still dancing in the air. You let yourself breathe for a moment. Outside, a bell rings faintly, calling clerks to the end-of-day debriefing. Not mandatory, but encouraged. You sigh and turn toward the great hall, already bracing for a fresh round of updates, revisions, and one overly cheerful colleague who insists on singing the imperial tax code like a hymn. Still, there's something nice about the predictability of it all. You can already guess which department will be late, construction permits, which one will loudly pretend to understand the new census forms, grain logistics, and who will accidentally sit in the emperor's cousin's seat, again. You walk a little slower. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because this is your world. This layered, labyrinthine, quill-stained empire of scrolls and second guesses. And despite its madness, its bureaucracy, its goat-related tax exemptions, you kind of love it. The debriefing hall is already buzzing when you arrive, not in a lively way, but more like a beehive after someone's poked it, and all the bees are trying to maintain civility while quietly plotting revenge. You take your assigned place at the long table carved from cedarwood, its surface warped from generations of elbows, spilled ink, and passive-aggressive scroll slams. Around you, colleagues shuffle in, clutching wax tablets, papyrus scrolls, and in one case, a suspiciously fragrant burlap sack marked "Urgent." You don't ask. The meeting begins with the usual overly formal greeting from the logothete of General Reports, who speaks in a tone that suggests he has personally never had a moment of joy. He clears his throat, an act so prolonged it could be its own minor liturgical rite, and begins reading out the day's updates. You try to listen, you really do, but the heat, the droning voice, and the unrelenting aroma of roasted onions wafting in from someone's satchel are conspiring against your focus. First item: road maintenance ledgers for the Via Egnatia. Apparently, someone miscalculated gravel allotments, and a whole section of road near Thessaloniki now has too much gravel. Caravans keep sinking into it like breadcrumbs in soup. The logothete sternly reminds everyone that gravel is not self-regulating. Next, a dispute between the Office of River Navigation and the Guild of Wine Merchants. The merchants want to transport amphorae via the Bosphorus, but the river inspectors insist they float too drunkenly to be stable. Historians still argue whether this was a technical concern or thinly veiled snobbery toward Thracian vintners. You dutifully note these updates, though a part of your brain is wondering whether it's possible to fall asleep with your eyes open while still maintaining a professional nod. Then comes your turn to speak. You rise, clear your throat, less theatrically than the logothete, but still with intent, and present your findings from the archive. You mention the updated tax quotas, the Capella sheep exemption, eliciting one snort and two raised eyebrows, and your recommendation to rephrase several ambiguous clauses in the parchment handling guidelines. You tried to keep it succinct. Of course, the moment you sit down, a clerk from the Salt Tax Bureau raises a hand and begins a meandering counterpoint involving brine evaporation rates, lunar cycles, and a theory that salt taxes should be measured by emotional saltiness rather than weight. You briefly regret not bringing a snack. Eventually, the meeting wraps with a few terse announcements, one involving a plague of scroll worms in the outer record rooms. They apparently prefer theological texts, and another about a new imperial edict. Henceforth, all copies of financial documents must be duplicated on both papyrus and wax, because one emperor's parrot allegedly pecked through a critical budget and caused a funding misfire in the Navy. You jot it down. Another entry for the "not making this up" pile. Outside, the sky has shifted to that deep Byzantine indigo, somewhere between melancholy and velvet. The lanterns lining the corridors are being lit one by one, their glow flickering over the mosaics like warm starlight. You step out into the courtyard to breathe for a moment before heading back to your chambers. The marble tiles are still warm under your sandals. A junior clerk is practicing rhetoric under their breath near the fountain, muttering something about municipal grain quotas with alarming passion. You pretend not to notice. It's here, in this courtyard, that the weirdest part of your day occurs. A messenger appears, flushed, dusty, and unmistakably panicked. He's carrying a scroll tied in the imperial colors, which is unusual. Even more unusual, it's addressed directly to you. You break the seal carefully, trying not to appear too curious even though your pulse has jumped like a startled goat. The scroll is brief. Too brief. It reads, "To the faithful servant of the pen. Report to the great chamber before dawn. Bring your inkstone." That's it. No signature, no clarification. Just ominous calligraphy and the faint smell of rose oil. You stare at it for a moment, unsure whether to feel honored, nervous, or mildly annoyed. The great chamber is rarely used, only for imperial audiences or matters too delicate for regular bureaucratic channels. You fold the scroll, tuck it into your satchel, and exhale. As you walk back through the lantern-lit halls, your mind drifts. You think about all the documents you've copied, the small decisions you've rendered that now ripple quietly through provinces, affecting traders, monks, barbers, and probably a very confused shepherd or two. You remember the ox-shaped paperweight, the musical sheep, the archivist's wordless gift of barley tea. You also remember that you still haven't eaten since early afternoon. Your stomach growls like a mildly inconvenienced lion. Fortunately, the kitchens stay open late for bureaucrats burning the midnight oil. And speaking of oil, you're really craving something fried. You veer off course toward the back wing, where the cook occasionally sets out leftover pastries with the consistency of roof tiles but the flavor of cinnamon dreams. As you walk, you catch sight of your reflection in a polished bronze sconce. Tired eyes, ink-stained fingers, and a tunic smudged with wax. This is you, bureaucrat, administrator, survivor of scroll-based drama. And tomorrow, apparently, possibly an imperial guest. You grab 2 pastries, one for now, one for emergency, and make your way slowly to your chambers, scroll in hand and crumbs trailing in your wake. Dawn arrives before you're ready, dragging a cool haze across the city like a sleepy veil. The streets are empty as you slip quietly from your quarters, dressed in your best but not ostentatious tunic, undyed wool with a thin crimson trim that says, reliable functionary, more than social climber. You've polished your inkstone, rewrapped your reed pens, and tucked your most presentable scrolls into a leather satchel. You've also eaten a small piece of honeyed bread, not because you're hungry, but because you suspect this might be the kind of morning where even digestion feels ceremonial. The palace is different at this hour, quieter, yes, but also watchful. The courtyards are filled with the scent of dew and olive oil, while distant torches flicker like tired eyelids. You pass a pair of guards in ornate lamellar armor. One is discreetly dozing with his pike balanced on one knee. The other nods at you like he suspects you're lost but lacks the energy to intervene. Inside the great chamber, the temperature drops. It always does. The walls are lined with gold-tiled depictions of imperial victories and religious miracles, but the air is curiously damp, like the inside of a treasury vault that sighs when it's alone. You're greeted not by the emperor, thankfully, but by a member of the inner staff, one of those officials who doesn't blink and probably hasn't had a dream since the coronation. He gestures silently to a side table. Waiting there is a scroll. A long one. You're invited, no, gently commanded, to transcribe it onto wax tablets, line by line, with no abbreviations, no questions, and no breaks. Your ink must be consistent, your spelling immaculate, your pace steady enough that it neither rushes nor delays the process. It is, in short, the Olympic sport of bureaucracy. You begin. The scroll turns out to be an imperial speech, one scheduled to be delivered at an upcoming feast commemorating a minor naval victory involving precisely 3 ships, one of which capsized due to a misjudged goat offering. The speech itself is riddled with flowery metaphors, double negatives, and at least one metaphor comparing the empire to a well-baked lentil pie. Historians still argue whether this was deliberate culinary symbolism or just a scribe's fever dream. As you copy, you start to fall into that familiar rhythm. Scratch. Pause. Dip. Write. Adjust the wax. Scratch again. It's almost meditative, like prayer, if prayer required perfect kerning and knowledge of regional diacritics. Hours pass. Your back begins to protest. Your fingers cramp. You switch to your left hand for a bit, which results in a line so wobbly it looks like the emperor suffered an emotional tremor. You smooth it out with a stylus edge and keep going. Eventually, a shadow falls over your work. You look up. A second clerk enters, older, hollow-eyed, and carrying a smaller scroll. This one's not for duplication. It's for delivery. To you. He hands it over and walks away without a word. Inside, the message is short. Well transcribed. A request. Investigate discrepancies in land registry of Bithynia. Use discretion. That's it. Again, no names. No seals. Just imperial handwriting and a very subtle. You're being watched. Aftertaste. Now, to the average person, land registries might not sound exciting. But you're not average. You've spent years learning the delicate art of imperial double filing and how tax evasion techniques evolve faster than hairstyles. So the idea of tracking discrepancies through crumbling land surveys and suspiciously identical tenant signatures. That's your version of court intrigue. You're given access to the registry room, an architectural afterthought wedged between the grain cellar and a disused prayer alcove. It smells like mildew and forgotten ambition. Inside, shelves groan under the weight of leather-bound ledgers dating back to at least 2 civil wars ago. You light a taper and begin to search. Columns of data stretch before you, owner names, crop yields, tithe percentages, and the occasional doodle of a suspiciously muscular chicken. You're not sure if that was boredom or a lost cult symbol. One thing becomes clear quickly: Bithynia's numbers don't add up. According to these ledgers, the same 4 plots of land have been registered under different owners every year for the last 6 cycles. And the harvest yields? Somehow they always manage to report precisely 432 bundles of barley. Not 431. Not 433. Always 432. Either these farmers are operating on divine agricultural intervention, or someone's been rounding up for convenience or profit. You scribble a quick summary and tuck it into your satchel. You'll need to report this, but carefully. Calling out corruption in the provinces is like trying to trim a lion's whiskers. Technically possible, but best done while the lion is very distracted. Possibly with lentil pie. You glance up from the scrolls. The day has fully arrived. Sunlight now trickles in through a slit window, illuminating motes of dust that drift like bureaucratic dreams in limbo. You stretch. Your knees pop in protest, which you take as a compliment from the universe. Heading out, you stop briefly in the scriptorium's side room to refill your inkpot. A novice scribe is curled up on a bench, surrounded by half-transcribed verses and a puddle of spilled black dye. He looks peaceful. Ink-stained, but peaceful. You step over him, quietly close the door, and move back into the main corridor. The rest of the building has woken up now. You pass a monk arguing with a quill vendor over feather softness. 2 junior tax clerks are taking turns trying to balance a ledger on their heads. For posture. And a bird, possibly the emperor's aforementioned parrot, is squawking something that sounds suspiciously like inflation. You smile. A little. Maybe you even chuckle. But just a little. Another day of Byzantine bureaucracy awaits. And you, dear functionary, are exactly the person to face it, with ink-stained hands, sore knuckles, and an ever-growing collection of absurd imperial notes. By mid-morning, the scent of burning frankincense mixes with freshly poured vinegar used to clean the marble floors, and your sandals squeak ever so slightly as you return to your designated alcove. The halls are buzzing now, not with chaos, no, Byzantines hate chaos, but with an organized swarm of purpose. You pass a chamberlain practicing his bow for an upcoming delegation from Armenia, and someone else is nervously fluffing the folds of his robe like it holds state secrets. You settle in with your wax tablet and start sorting the land irregularities you've uncovered. The Bithynia situation is just the tip of a Byzantine iceberg. And like all things iceberg-related, the danger is what's buried below, probably under a metaphorical ton of inconsistent crop records and conflicting noble lineages. As you pore over survey data, one entry catches your eye. A certain tract of land, let's call it Parcel 9B, appears to be both a vineyard and a goat pasture depending on the document you're reading. It also belongs to a widow in one record, a monastery in another, and a G of Smyrna in a third. Historians still argue whether this kind of clerical ambiguity was born from honest error or deliberate bureaucratic obfuscation. Or, as one monk wrote in the margin, the land itself may be confused. And confusion, dear listener, is currency in Byzantine politics. The trick to navigating it all is to appear unimportant while being quietly indispensable. You are a ghost in the palace, a whisper at the ear of those who make decisions, a carrier of facts too boring to betray but too vital to ignore. A knock disturbs your thoughts. You look up, half expecting another scroll. Instead, it's a colleague, Theodolos, a man with a mustache so immaculately waxed it may have its own separate filing cabinet. He carries 2 cups of watered wine and a look that says, "Conspiratorial lunch break." "Come," he whispers, glancing both ways in exaggerated fashion. "Let us commit the crime of sitting." You follow him to a shaded courtyard ringed with olive trees, their branches lazily waving in the sun like retired imperial banners. Theodolos hands you a cup and produces a small packet of dried figs from somewhere inside his robe. "Payment for discretion," he mutters, and you're not sure if he's joking. You sip. It's terrible. Slightly warm and slightly sour, like the love child of grape juice and disappointment, but you smile anyway. Over wine and figs, the conversation drifts. He tells you about a scribe who accidentally copied a legal decree into a psalm book, which resulted in 2 monks taking a vow of silence in protest against property taxes. You respond with the story of the court artist who painted the emperor's likeness slightly cross-eyed and tried to pass it off as a theological metaphor. It's this kind of humor, gentle, self-deprecating, usually involving parchment, that gets you through the average Tuesday in Constantinople. Eventually, Theodolos lowers his voice. "There's a rumor," he says, with a glance over his shoulder so exaggerated it makes you check yours too, just out of reflex. "A reshuffle may be coming. Something to do with the naval budget and that missing tribute from Trebizond." You raise an eyebrow. Tribute shipments don't just vanish unless someone wants them to vanish. Or someone decided a few barrels of wine would taste better if not taxed at all. Or, the most Byzantine option, the shipment arrived exactly on time and in full, but the Rome official signed the receipt using a title 2 ranks too high, which invalidated the entry, thereby legally transforming the cargo into a rumor. You make a mental note. Check naval receipts from Trebizond. Your companion returns to his jokes. You both share a quiet laugh, even though you're fairly certain you've just crossed the threshold into a low-grade political entanglement. It's fine. You'll deal with it like you always do, by filing 3 copies, double-checking the margins, and asking precisely 0 unnecessary questions. Back at your desk, a new request awaits. This one is scented, literally. The note has been dabbed with rosewater, a flourish typical of the Augusta's attendants. Apparently, a list of ceremonial garments has gone missing, and no one can determine whether it's been misfiled, misappropriated, or turned into a very expensive set of drapes. You pull up the ceremonial inventory rolls, and sure enough, there's an anomaly. 32 cloaks embroidered with phoenixes were marked as delivered, but never recorded as presented. Either they're languishing in a storeroom, or someone has a very glamorous pigeon coop. You quietly log the discrepancy, then begin redrawing a supply chart to track ceremonial garments across imperial warehouses. It is as boring as it sounds, but also oddly comforting. You create categories: tunics, cloaks, veils, ornamental sashes, inexplicably expensive buttons. You debate whether silk fringe deserves its own column. You decide yes. Absolutely. Still, you're interrupted again before you can color code the margins. Another note. No signature, but the handwriting is familiar, short, tidy strokes with an impatient tilt. It reads, "You've done well. The survey work is noted. One question remains: who benefits from the confusion?" And there it is. The pivot. The quiet prompt that turns your day from paperwork into subtle espionage. You reread the note 3 times. Then you fold it carefully, slip it behind a copy of the tax register, and rise. Your next stop isn't on your original itinerary. It's not even on your public one. You make your way to the Eastern Archives, which technically require a bronze medallion for access. You do not have such a medallion. But you do have an official-looking scroll tube, and the expression of someone who is very busy with boring things. This combination works surprisingly often in imperial corridors. Inside, you begin to look for estate ownership logs, specifically any documents with matching seals from Bithynia. Within minutes, a pattern emerges. Not from the text, but from the seals themselves. Several scrolls feature a tiny crescent tucked subtly beneath the usual eagle insignia. You recall hearing rumors that this symbol was once used by a certain eunuch official with suspicious ties to the grain fleets. He supposedly retired to a villa in Cappadocia and took up gardening, but nobody actually believes that. People don't just retire in the Byzantine court. They either fade into paperwork, or get promoted so far they disappear. You copy the seal, tuck your notes away, and quietly slip out of the archive before anyone asks questions like, "Who authorized this?" or "Why are you sweating through your wool?" Back at your desk, you return to your usual tasks: signing scrolls, reviewing edicts, sipping bad wine from a clay cup that smells faintly of fish. But the question lingers. Who benefits? Maybe you will. Eventually. Or maybe the benefit is simply staying unnoticed, which in this empire is its own kind of power. Back in your chamber, the afternoon sun is slanting through the high window in ribbons of gold and dust. You sit in your usual spot, now a little more alert than before. The office of a Byzantine bureaucrat may look sleepy to outsiders, especially those whose idea of adventure involves swords and conquests. But beneath the parchment and procedural calm lies a game every bit as sharp-edged. The trick is that the blades are metaphorical. Usually, you shift your attention to a stack of petitions. These are written in a variety of scripts and orthographies, some neat and crisp, others looking like they were scratched by a chicken on laudanum. You scan them slowly. There's a request from a baker seeking reduced levies due to unusually aggressive yeast, and another from a mid-level priest who swears that his basilica's roof tiles are possessed by demons. A third, surprisingly well-penned, outlines the boundary dispute of two noble brothers arguing over a mulberry grove, and contains 3 references to divine favor and 1 suspiciously detailed map. You sort them with methodical calm, 1 pile for temple matters, 1 for property claims, 1 for needs more translation, and 1 you label mentally as let someone else deal with this. That last category includes the demon tiles. While doing this, you hum under your breath, something from the hymn cycle, maybe, or a popular drinking song with the theological parts left in. Byzantium has a curious ability to blur the sacred and the mundane. You can sing about St. Demetrios while still cursing the ink stains on your tunic. Outside, a bell tolls. Not the high bronze chime of official proceedings, but the lower, chunkier tone of the service kitchens calling the midday meal. You consider skipping it. But then again, skipping meals is a good way to make yourself noticed, and the worst thing to be, as you've long understood, is noticed too much. You stand, stretch the stiffness from your back, and make your way toward the refectory. The corridors you pass now hum with routine. Servants sweep the tiled floors, their brooms scattering dust into the air like incense. A pair of guards argue over a game of knucklebones, their voices low, respectful of the setting even in play. You pass a junior secretary, barely 14 and looking crushed beneath the weight of a scroll case longer than his arm. You give him a half-smile. We've all been there. The refectory is dim, lit only by slanted beams of daylight and a few oil lamps. You take your usual place along the middle table, 3rd seat from the window, behind a pillar that blocks the draught and 1/4 of your view. Perfect. Today's meal is barley porridge with a dab of goat cheese and a wedge of something claiming to be bread. It's nourishing in the way that time is nourishing. It doesn't taste like much, but you know you need it. As you chew, conversation murmurs around you like gentle waves. Nothing overtly political, just the day's weather, the latest repairs to the cisterns, the rumor that someone's parrot escaped and now lives in the chapel rafters, echoing bits of liturgy in wildly inappropriate moments. Still, here in Byzantium, even birds can become politically charged. Historians still argue whether a green parakeet that once screamed, "Traitor!" during a public procession caused a riot or merely reflected one already brewing. You finish your porridge, decline a second helping of bread, because it might actually be a second helping of last week's bread, and make your way back toward the scriptorium. But your walk is interrupted by a flick of fabric, a soft voice. "A moment, if you please." You recognize the speaker instantly, Sebastocrator Nicetas, one of the higher-ranking aristocrats who's carved out an obscure role that seems entirely ceremonial, yet somehow still has real influence. His robes are an alarming shade of gold, trimmed in peacock blue silk, and his voice carries the practiced rhythm of someone who never needs to raise it. He does not wait for your answer. Instead, he walks beside you, hands clasped behind his back, as if you two are old friends and not separated by about 15 degrees of court hierarchy. "I heard," he begins lightly, "that you've been exploring land records. A little estate in Bithynia, yes?" You nod cautiously. This is the Byzantine version of a trapdoor creaking open. "Just verifying the surveys. A few discrepancies in the grain tallies." "Ah, yes," he replies, voice silky. "Discrepancies. Such a useful word. It can mean so many things. A slip of the pen, a failing memory, or a delay in loyalty. You choose your next words like you're walking across cracked ice. My job is to resolve ambiguities, not assign intentions." Nicetas pauses, then smiles. "Very good. You'll do well. He turns to leave, then adds without looking back. Be careful, of course. Not all discrepancies want to be found. And with that, he's gone, sweeping down the corridor like a gold-draped warning. You exhale, slowly. Then return to your office and shut the door, quietly, because slamming would feel too dramatic. You sit down, unfurl your wax tablet, and start listing the properties associated with the crescent seal. There's a name that keeps resurfacing, Strategos Basil of Obsikion. Not a high official at court, but with enough landholdings to stir curiosity. And apparently enough influence to have his estate records massaged gently into bureaucratic mist. Your interest is piqued. But you know better than to act openly. So instead, you begin working on a hypothetical report, purely academic, of course, about how lost survey data might affect taxation estimates. You phrase everything in passive voice and pile it high with conditional verbs. Might, could, possibly. Nothing that says, this is definitely corruption. And everything that says, just a humble functionary running the numbers. Meanwhile, you slip a coded note to Theodolos, requesting a quiet meeting in the records annex. As the sun starts to lean toward evening, a soft breeze wafts through the high slats of the window, carrying with it the faint smell of olive smoke and roasted chickpeas. Another day is winding down, and as usual, you've managed to do exactly what you're supposed to, and maybe just a little more than that, without drawing fire from above. Well, not yet. Your fingers are stained with wax and ink. Your eyes ache from squinting at seals. And yet you smile? This empire may be held together with bribes, bureaucracy, and very stale bread, but to you, it's home. The hour grows late, and the mosaic-tiled corridors begin to cool under the fading heat of the day. You've returned to your little corner of the scribal universe, scrolls unfurled across your desk like gentle waves lapping against a bureaucratic shore. By now, most of your colleagues have slipped off, muttering vague things about evening prayers, or minor family obligations, which, in Byzantine, usually means dinner with someone politically useful. But you remain. Because in a city like Constantinople, especially within these imperial walls, the most interesting things happen when no one is watching. You're waiting for Theodolos, and while you do, you fiddle absently with a broken stylus and review your tax record anomalies. Yet again. The estate in Bithynia still doesn't add up. The numbers shift like sand. You see patterns forming, minor edits to tally columns, names overwritten in a different hand, seals impressed just slightly off-center. These are not beginner mistakes. Someone very competent is very invested in keeping this estate's paper trail fuzzy. And that someone, you suspect, is not Basil of Obsikion himself. He's a soldier, not a scribe. Someone else is doing the parchment laundering. The only question is whether they're trying to cover for corruption or create leverage for blackmail. Theodolos finally arrives, late and slightly out of breath, holding a bundle of documents in one hand and a half-eaten date cake in the other. You admire his priorities. He drops into the chair across from you with a sigh that sounds like it's been aging in a wine cellar. You'll owe me a favor, he mutters, before sliding the parchment bundle your way. You open it slowly, reverently, as if it might contain the secrets of the empire itself. In a way it does. Inside are copies of military land grants, signed and sealed by 3 different strateg over the past 5 years. All concern the same general region. And each includes a temporary transfer of harvest rights to an unnamed third party, a clause that's usually standard when soldiers are away on campaign. But here, the third party appears every time under a generic pseudonym. Lycoergos the Younger. Now, no one in Bithynia is named Lycoergos anymore. It's like finding someone today named King Arthur II. A little too mythic, a little too fake. Which makes it perfect for someone trying to ghostwrite themselves into land ownership. You point this out to Theodolos, who grins. I thought you'd like that. Someone's been laundering land through ghost identities. Want to guess how many times Lycoergos appears in other tax ledgers? You raise an eyebrow. More than 0? 17, he says smugly. Across 6 themes. This is the kind of news that makes the scribes sit up straighter, even after a long day. 17 ghost entries across 6 administrative divisions means someone has created a phantom owner, possibly several, to hide illegal accumulations of land. It's not just a scandal. It's an entire shadow economy. You glance around the quiet room. A candle flickers. Outside, the breeze has grown stronger, rattling the shutters like a hesitant knock. "Why tell me?" you ask. Theodolos shrugs. "Because if I go digging alone, I get disappeared. But if you write a hypothetical report with vague language and generous caveats, and I accidentally leave it on the desk of the wrong person, well, then it's just paperwork." Historians still argue whether Byzantium fell from outside invasion or internal rot. But moments like this make you suspect it just quietly filed itself into non-existence. You agree to draft the report, of course. Not because you're brave, but because you're too curious not to. And maybe, just maybe, a few well-placed truths, properly dressed in hypotheticals and if clauses, can rattle the right doorframes without bringing the roof down. You and Theodolos part ways, promising nothing, acknowledging everything. Back at your desk, the candle sputters. You begin to write, slowly, carefully, massaging the language until it becomes a kind of lullaby for the dangerously alert. Sentences that read like sleepwalking. A paragraph about irregularities. A footnote about inconsistencies in titling terminology. Entire pages that say, "We noticed, but not too much." Your quill scratches gently, rhythmically, like a metronome for thought. Meanwhile, your mind drifts, ever so slightly, to your personal accounts. Because, of course, everyone has them. You own a modest piece of property just outside the city walls. A little vineyard inherited from your uncle. Nothing scandalous. Unless, of course, someone decides that you are like Orgos. And just like that, you're reminded of the Byzantine golden rule. It's not about being innocent. It's about being unimportant. The next morning, you'll have to double-check your own records. Just in case. For now, you set the parchment aside. Your candle has burned low, casting long shadows across the chamber. The voices in the hallway have died down completely. Outside, the distant sound of waves kissing the Sea of Marmara is barely audible. You lean back in your chair and close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to think. You think about how strange it is, this empire of ink and empire of ghosts. One built on treaties and tax codes, the other on secrets and sleight of hand. And you? You float somewhere in between. A civil servant, yes, but also, somehow, a tightrope walker over a pit of very hungry wolves. All you wanted was a quiet life with predictable tasks, dry parchment, and maybe the occasional scroll that didn't smell like mildew. And instead, you have shadow landowners, gilded whispers, and military officers named after extinct Spartans. You chuckle to yourself, softly, because here, laughter can echo in dangerous ways. And then you gather your tools, snuff the candle, and exit the room with the deliberate nonchalance of someone who's definitely not involved in anything important. Because in Byzantium, survival is less about what you know, and more about how well you pretend not to. The morning sun slants through the arched windows in that particular shade of gold that always makes Constantinople look a little too majestic for its own good. You make your way to the scribe's annex again, past ivy-covered columns and a fruit vendor loudly overcharging for his pomegranates. Your sandals slap against the flagstones with a rhythm that feels suspiciously like the beginnings of responsibility. Inside, everything smells faintly of ink, wax, and sweat, Byzantine bureaucracy's holy trinity. You settle into your seat and roll out the draft you worked on last night. The hypothetical report. We're not saying it's a conspiracy, but we're not saying it either. Scroll. You're just adding one more clause, something about land adjudication discrepancies, when the silence breaks. "Early for you," says Eudokia, another scribe 2 desks over. She's wearing a deep purple himation with enough starch to double as armor. Her hair is pinned back with a stylus, possibly stolen from her enemies. "Just trying to keep up with the corruption," you reply casually. She laughs, but it's the kind of laugh that says, "Don't tell me anything specific or I'll be forced to denounce you." Eudokia's specialty is imperial edicts. She copies the emperor's decrees by hand, making sure the language is just vague enough that three departments can claim authority over the same issue. Byzantine law isn't about clarity, it's about plausible deniability dressed up in iambic Greek. You hand her a folded piece of parchment and say, "If anything happens to me, tell my cat I loved him." She rolls her eyes but slips the parchment into her sleeve. That's trust, in bureaucrat terms. Today's real task, though, isn't subterfuge. It's the monthly metrics meeting. Which sounds exciting until you realize it means you, a dozen other scribes, and 3 medium-ranking officials packed into a room shaped like a brick oven, arguing over the quantity of sheep exported from Cappadocia. You file in with the others. There are charts. Tables. One man has brought a portable abacus, which he wields like a general. The assistant to the logothetes reads out crop yields like a town crier with a grudge. Barley production in Charjanan fell by 6%. No official explanation offered. You stifle a yawn. Someone blames unseasonal rains. Another blames negligent farmers. A third mutters something about heretical prayers throwing off the weather. Historians still argue whether Byzantines genuinely believed in divine causality for weather patterns, or just like the theological drama. When it's your turn, you deliver your summary of land transfers and inheritance backlogs. Everyone nods sagely as if they understand or care. You drop one sly line about anomalous estate overlaps in Bithynia, and nobody reacts. Which is exactly what you want. Visibility is the enemy of subtlety. After the meeting, you're invited for a late morning snack in the garden by one of the younger strategic aides. He's bright-eyed, nervously sweaty, and far too enthusiastic for someone in an empire this old. Over stale biscuits and watery honey wine, he tells you he wants to reform the land registry process. Standardize it. Simplify it. Cut through the duplication. You smile politely, like a person watching a goat charge a marble statue. Admirable, but doomed. Best of luck, you say, nibbling your biscuit like it's a diplomatic gesture. He grins. You'll help, right? You respond with the non-committal head tilt that every Byzantine learns before they can walk. You neither agree nor refuse. Which, in this city, is practically a blood oath. He leaves convinced you're on board. You leave wondering how long until he gets reassigned to supervise sea sponge taxation in Crete. On your way back to your desk, you pass the scriptorium where monks copy religious manuscripts under the watchful eyes of saints painted on the walls. The scratching of quills is hypnotic, like rain on parchment. One monk looks up briefly and nods. His ink-stained fingers twitch, and you recognize the coded flick of his pinky. You step inside casually. The monk, Isoakios, isn't just any monk. He used to be a treasury clerk before he grew a conscience and a beard. Now he wears humility like a costume, but he still deals in whispers. Thought you'd want to see this, he mutters, handing you a half-burned sheet. It's a draft of an estate deed, bearing the same pseudonym. Lycourgos the Younger. But this one's older than any others you've seen. Dated 2 emperors ago. This changes things. It means the ghost identity wasn't born recently. It's an old ghost, maybe even a useful fiction passed down like a cursed heirloom. Isoakios raises an eyebrow. Still think it's about tax fraud? You shake your head slowly. It's deeper. Someone's using Lycourgos as a vessel to hide ownership through generations. Not just money laundering. Legacy laundering. He smiles. Then I suppose you'll want to speak with the archivist. You do not want to speak with the archivist. The archivist is a relic himself, more myth than man. He lives in the lower levels of the palace library, where scrolls go to die. No one's sure if he sleeps. He has perfect recall of every imperial census since the Macedonian dynasty. And he doesn't like visitors. But you're in too deep now. That evening, with the city beginning to smell like warm bread and coal smoke, you descend the spiral stairs into the belly of the archive. The archivist's room is dark and dry, lined with scroll racks that seem to lean in like gossiping old women. He doesn't look up as you approach. Just says, "You're here about Lycourgos." You pause. Yes. He holds out a hand. Payment. You fish out a small jar of preserved quince from your satchel. It's the standard bribe. He takes it without thanks, then produces a battered scroll from beneath a stack of Roman military records. Lycurgos was first used in 876. A placeholder name for lands confiscated after a noble family fell out of favor. No one removed it. People just kept adding. You frown. On purpose? Eventually. Especially when those lands were supposed to be redistributed but weren't. Safer to leave them in the name of a ghost than claim them openly. A pause. So who owns them now? The archivist shrugs. Everyone and no one. That's the thing about Byzantium. Ownership is a suggestion. Power is performance. And history? History is just a series of careful misfilings. You thank him and make your way back up to the surface. The sun has dipped low behind the Hagia Sophia, casting the city in bronze and shadow. You breathe in the thick scent of spiced oil and roasted garlic wafting from a nearby cart. You're tired. Not just from the stairs. From the weight of knowing. But there's still one final scroll to draft. One last web to spin. You head home, thoughts swirling like wine in a clay cup, already composing your next report. 1 part warning, 2 parts lullaby. Your flat is quiet when you return, save for the faint hiss of the oil lamp and the occasional groan of wood settling against the stone. You hang your cloak on its usual peg, its edge still faintly dusty from the archives, and sit heavily at your low writing desk. The cushion sighs beneath you, one of the few things in your life that does so without a request attached. You set down your satchel, unlatch it, and slide the archivist's brittle scroll onto the desk. The ink is faded, the parchment curling like it's trying to escape centuries of responsibility. Lycurgos the Younger. A name that doesn't belong to anyone but has fingerprints all over half the empire's coastline. Outside, the faint sounds of clinking plates and children's laughter drift up from the alley below. Byzantium winds down slowly, like a beast that pretends it's going to sleep but is really just sharpening its claws in the dark. You light a second lamp and begin drafting. This time, your tone is more careful. Less accusatory. More speculative. A what-if scenario wrapped in hypotheticals. You mention that the name Lycurgos might be a clerical error. Then suggest gently that perhaps it has been used deliberately, and that oversight might warrant an internal review, not to unearth guilt, heavens no, but to ensure the accuracy of future property assessments. This is Byzantine communication at its finest, the ability to accuse someone without ever naming them, and to suggest reform without implying fault. You're proud. And a little unnerved. You've become rather good at this. After sealing the draft with your personal mark, a stylized fig tree, for some reason lost even to you, you place it in a leather folder, ready for delivery the next morning. You stand, stretch, and decide it's time to eat. You head to the communal courtyard where a couple of your neighbors have laid out a simple meal, lentils, olives, and boiled wheat soaked in vinegar. You sit among them, greeting them by name and trading a few jokes about leaky roofs and pigeon-related disasters. No one here knows you're the one quietly nudging state policy with every dry sentence. It's better that way. After dinner, you walk alone for a while. Down narrow alleys, past shuttered bakeries and laundry lines still fluttering with the day's sun. Eventually, you end up back at the Forum of Constantine, its once grand columns casting long shadows. A man is singing in Armenian nearby. Something about a lost city and an apricot tree. You don't understand the lyrics, but the tune loops around your thoughts like silk. You take the long way home, past the imperial fountain where the water has run dry again, past the weaver's guild house where someone's forgotten to extinguish a torch, and finally through the fragrant dark of the spice market. Everything smells of cardamom, turmeric, and someone's ill-advised attempt at making fish jerky. Back in your apartment, your cat, unnamed, unbothered, has claimed your reading pillow and looks offended when you return. You scoop him up anyway, and he lets out a dignified huff before curling into your lap, tail twitching like he's writing state secrets with it. You open a half-finished scroll, nothing important, just a poem from a retired general trying to be philosophical about plumbing, and pretend to read. Your mind, of course, is elsewhere. You're thinking about Lycurgos again. How many other ghost names are floating around the system? How much of this empire is actually being held together by make-believe? It's oddly comforting in a way. Fragile things tend to endure longer when no one looks at them too hard. You drift for a while, lost in thought, until a soft knock at the door breaks your trance. You open it to find a boy, barefoot, covered in ink stains, clearly a messenger. He hands you a note, squinting. They said to give it to the fig tree. He mumbles, then bolts. You unroll the parchment. It's from Eudokia. Just 3 words. You were right. That's never a good sign. You set it down and sit quietly. There's no rush. There never is. The wheels of the Byzantine state turn slowly, but they always turn. Whether they crush or elevate depends entirely on how well you read the terrain. You begin reviewing tomorrow's agenda. An early meeting with the scribes. A quiet check-in with the monk at the scriptorium. And if time allows, a visit to the baths. Your back has been staging a minor rebellion since yesterday. You take a moment to pour yourself a cup of watered wine and sip slowly. You can hear the sounds of a lyre from somewhere nearby. Your neighbor's son, maybe? Still practicing the same melody he's mangled for a week straight. But tonight, it sounds almost pleasant. You allow yourself to relax, body sinking into the cushions, the wine softening the edges of your thoughts. Your cat purrs deeply, content. You think about how, for all its chaos, Byzantine life has a rhythm. A choreography of decrees, gossip, and shared bread. Even when it makes no sense, it somehow continues. Endlessly. Just like Lyco goes. And you, sitting in your tiny apartment, with your wine and your secrets and your slowly cooling lamp, are part of that rhythm now. A bureaucrat among thousands, anonymous yet essential. Forgotten by history, but vital to keeping it from unraveling. You smile, just a little. It's not a bad life. Your eyelids are starting to weigh down, but the duties of the day have not entirely loosened their grip just yet. You know you should go to bed soon, but you've developed this strange little ritual, an almost superstitious habit. Before you retire, you take one last look through the stack of scrolls by your desk, as if some forgotten papyrus will whisper the secret to navigating the court's latest nonsense. Tonight you choose a slim roll tied with green thread. It's not state business. It's poetry, unrequested, anonymously submitted. You suspect it's from the young assistant to the provincial tax auditor. She always blushes a little too violently when she hands over reports. The poem is about olives, surprisingly. Or maybe not. In Byzantium, even your vegetables have metaphors. You smile as you read the lines. They're clumsy but sincere. Something about longing, bitter branches, and shared oil on dry bread. There's a verse about wanting to be pressed, not romantically, but like an olive under the stone wheel of life, which frankly sums up your job better than most sermons do. You tuck it gently under your writing weights. Some scrolls don't need to be archived, they need to be remembered. As you begin extinguishing your lamps one by one, your gaze lands on the windowsill where a small stack of tribute tokens sits, miniature charms, wax stamps, and tokens pressed in lead. Payments in gratitude or petty bribes, depending on how you feel that day. One is shaped like a lion. Another, like a stylized loaf of bread. They remind you that, in this city, influence often comes in the form of things that jingle, or things that don't, but hold weight all the same. You place the lion into your palm and weigh it. Tiny. Dense. You remember the man who gave it to you, a brewer who'd been wrongly taxed twice in 1 week thanks to a scribe with a hangover. You filed a form that took 4 weeks to be read, 3 weeks to be approved, and 1 satisfying morning to fix. The brewer sent the lion token with a note. For the man who made wine taste sweet again. You keep it because, honestly, bureaucracy doesn't offer a lot of praise. But a metal lion? That's something. You step onto your small balcony for a final breath of the night air. The city is different now. Quieter, softer. The bells from Hagia Sophia have long since ceased, and now the wind carries scents of stale bread and warm limestone. From up here, the rooftops seem almost gentle. No one is arguing. No carts are groaning. Just the murmur of the wind in the fabric of awnings, the creak of ropes from nearby boats in the harbor, and the faint lilt of someone snoring dramatically through a window to your left. You stare across the rooftops and see one tiny flickering lamp still burning in the palace's outer offices. Some poor soul is still transcribing imperial edicts by hand, likely with cramping fingers and an existential headache. You nod in solidarity, unseen. Historians still argue whether Byzantine bureaucracy was a well-oiled system or an elegant farce. Probably both. You've seen it function like clockwork, right before catching fire and blaming the sundial. Take that dispute over olive allotments on the southern frontier. The report from that region was written in such layered euphemism that it took you a full week just to realize they were talking about smuggling camels, not oil. The scandal was eventually buried, as so many are, under layers of noble signatures and increasingly vague justifications. You, meanwhile, had to invent a new filing category for miscellaneous agricultural untruths. But hey, the camel merchants still got paid. And you got a story? You return inside, shutting the window quietly so as not to wake your neighbors, or the cat, who's now moved to your bed and seems to believe you were simply keeping it warm for him. You change into your sleep tunic. The fabric is rough but comforting. You settle into bed slowly, bones creaking like an old ship docking at last. The mattress is lumpy in a familiar way. You find your favorite indentation and allow your limbs to sink into it. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a late boat horn. The docks are always awake, unlike the Senate, which only appears conscious on official days. Your mind drifts. You think about the Empress's scribe, who swears the palace is haunted by the ghost of an overworked tax collector who died mid-inventory and now shuffles through documents at midnight. You've never seen him, but sometimes, when your office door creaks open for no reason, you leave out a scroll just in case. Maybe that's the secret to surviving the Byzantine court. Not power. Not wealth. Just paperwork that ghosts can respect. You pull the blanket up to your chin. The cat has somehow claimed the space behind your knees and is snoring, audibly, like he's memorizing tax codes in his dreams. Tomorrow will bring more forms. More rumors. Probably another request to review a decision that offended someone's cousin's priest's goat. But for now, you're allowed this silence, safety, and a belly full of lentils. Your thoughts begin to fuzz at the edges. Your breath slows, deepens. The weight of the lion token still sits on your bedside shelf, a small reminder that your work, invisible as it is, has shape. Outside, the moonlight falls across the rooftops of Constantinople, silvering the domes and terraces like a quiet benediction. You stare at the ceiling. There's a small crack shaped like a fish. You've always liked that. And slowly, softly, you begin to fade. You dream you're late to a meeting with the Emperor's left boot. Not the man, just the boot. And it's scolding you for failing to file a requisition form for ceremonial slippers. You apologize. Profusely. The boot is unimpressed. It starts quoting from Justinian's Codex. You wake with a snort. Thankfully, it's still early. The sky outside your window has barely begun its pale transition towards sunrise. A quiet, watery blue lingers on the horizon. The city hasn't stretched its limbs yet. For a few fleeting moments, everything remains suspended in that lovely pause between sleep and reality. You roll onto your back and stare up at the ceiling again. The fish-shaped crack seems a little smug today. Maybe it's proud of how well you handled yesterday's flaming petition from that noble family with opinions about plum tariffs. Or maybe it's just a crack. But still, you let yourself linger in bed a bit longer. Bureaucrats don't exactly rush into battle. The pen might be mightier than the sword, but it definitely moves slower, especially before breakfast. When you finally rise, your feet meet the cool floor tiles, and the chill brings a surprising clarity. You splash your face with water from a basin, lukewarm, mildly metallic, and vaguely priest-blessed. The scent of olive oil soap clings to your fingertips, and somewhere in the building, someone drops a pot. You shuffle to your desk and squint at the morning docket, already delivered by a scribe who somehow neither eats nor sleeps. 2 new property disputes. 3 merchant appeals. 1 request to bless a shipment of walnuts. You wonder if walnut blesser Might be a less stressful career path. Your stomach grumbles. Breakfast is humble: barley bread, a smear of cheese, and a handful of figs from your cousin's orchard, dried and just chewy enough to qualify as exercise for your jaw. You chew slowly, looking out the window as the city slowly wakes. A fishmonger wheels his cart past your alley, humming something tuneless but oddly comforting. A few kids chase a chicken with the conviction of future senators. Somewhere, a hawker sings out about miraculous imported hair dye from the Levant, guaranteed to banish grays and all your regrets. You're tempted. And then the bells. Dull, echoing, and layered with history. They ripple across the city from the church towers, calling the faithful and the punctual. You're neither, but you get dressed anyway. Your work robe has been mended 3 times and dyed so often it now resembles a shade of optimistic prune. You drape it across your shoulders, pin it with a brass clasp shaped like a peacock feather, and slide your writing stylus into its usual spot in your belt. The small joys of readiness. Your sandals creak as you step into the corridor, nodding to fellow scribes, stewards, and one perpetually suspicious-looking man who may or may not be spying for someone. You're not sure. You stop asking after the last time he tried to bribe you with honeyed almonds. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine bureaucracy was held together by sheer tradition or just a deep collective fear of disappointing the wrong eunuch. Either way, you've learned one truth: if you smile while handing over a form, people tend to believe you have power. You return to your office, settle behind your desk, and light the small oil lamp with practiced ease. The flame dances gently, casting warm shadows on your paperwork. The smell of beeswax and ink fills the air. You breathe it in. Familiar. Unremarkable. Yours. The first petition of the day is written on goatskin, rolled too tightly, and sealed with what appears to be an image of a very surprised duck. It's a complaint from a widow who insists the baker next door has been stealing her roof tiles to patch his own ceiling. You sigh, lean back, and reach for your favorite ink brush. Another day begins. Another list of tasks that no one will thank you for completing, but which, if left undone, might unravel the very seams of the city's order. Or at least result in dangerously slanted rooftops. You start writing. The quill scratches gently across the parchment, the ink flows with calm purpose, and the city hums its slow rhythm just beyond your window. And for all the chaos, the scrolls, the whispered court intrigues and whispered prayers, you realize you wouldn't trade this for anything. Not for command of an army. Not for the Empress's velvet sandals. Not even for the walnut blessing gig. Because here, in the quiet heart of this golden-hazed empire, you matter in invisible ways. And that's something worth waking up for. Now that the lamps have dimmed and the final ink stains dry upon your fingers, let the city slip gently from your thoughts. Let the rustle of parchment fade, and the scurrying footsteps of hurried scribes dissolve into a soft hush. The corridors of power are quiet now, and the weight of scrolls, decisions, and minor royal crises no longer presses upon your chest. You are not a bureaucrat anymore. You are simply resting. Just a body in bed, warm beneath your blanket, safe in the stillness of the night. Let your breath deepen. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Let go of that merchant's dispute, that missing olive report, that noble's baffling request for a tax exemption for sacred donkeys. Outside your imagined window, Constantinople sleeps beneath its stars. The marble domes glint under moonlight. The harbor rocks gently. The cat snores. And you, dear listener, have done enough for one day. So let go. Let your muscles go slack. Let the narrative dissolve into velvet silence. Close your eyes. The city will wait. Sweet dreams.